My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
Richard Nixon.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Ronald Reagan.
Tear down this wall.
George W. Bush.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
And Donald Trump.
And a friend of mine for a long time, he only likes politics. If you ask him about how are the Yankees doing, he has no interest. If you ask him almost anything, he likes politics, and he's a professional at the highest level. Roger Stone.
All of these presidents relied on one man to secure their seat in the Oval Office. That man is Roger Stone. This is The Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
Welcome. I'm Roger Stone, and this is The Roger Stone Show here on 77 WABC, where we're making AM radio great again. For the next 2 hours, now from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time, that's our new time, we'll be here talking news, politics, history, style, culture, well, and more. So don't touch that dial at 770 AM, perhaps the most powerful AM signal in America today. In fact, I recommend that you go download the 77 WABC radio app to your cell phone right now. That way you won't miss any of some of the most amazing lineup of talk, radio, commentary, and entertainment anywhere on AM radio. Yep, I'm talking about Sid Rosenstein with Sid and Friends in the Morning. I'm talking about Larry Kudlow, the apostle of economic growth who quarterbacked the revitalization of America's economy under President Donald Trump, who's here on Saturdays. You don't want to miss Cindy Adams, the queen of gossip, who always has the inside skinny here on Saturdays. Of course, there's the offbeat and always provocative Frank Morano with his Other Side of Midnight show. I can't fail to mention America's mayor, the greatest mayor in New York City history, Rudy Giuliani, who's here every weekday. My old friend Dominic Carter, who always has his fingers on the pulse of New York. And of course, a veteran radio journalist, Rita Cosby, who's here every weeknight and who breaks more news and has more headliners than perhaps anybody else on the radio dial. And of course, I have to mention Katz and Cosby. That's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby, always with an all-star panel at 5 o'clock during the week, 8 o'clock Sunday mornings, helps you really get a recap of the day, and then on Sundays, like today, kind of set the table for the entire news day. So download that 77 WABC radio app so you don't miss any of it. The thing I like the most about the app is that you can go back and listen to some of our greatest shows. President Donald Trump, who appeared here on the Roger Stone Show. General Michael Flynn, who has appeared in the past, joins us again today. Country and Western star John Rich, not to mention the great Lee Greenwood. So you can go to the archives after the fact, listen to those great shows. Believe me, it is well worth your time to download the 77 WABC radio app to your cell phone so you don't miss any of the very best programming on AM radio anywhere today. Look at the world. Things seem to be spinning out of control. The United States is bogged down in the Ukraine-Russian war. Russia threatens nuclear attacks on America's city. If that were the case, there would be no chance of survival. This conflagration has already cost us in excess of $200 billion more. And there are many in the Congress, including many in the Republican caucus, who want to ship them more. We now have a war in Israel, the most casualty in that nation's history, and a much wider conflict threatened. We are flooded with war propaganda, much of it horrific, some of it true, other pieces of it untrue, but all of it shocking at a time that we need world peace. China is becoming increasingly bellicose towards Taiwan and the United States. The Border Patrol has literally opened our southern border, allowing millions of illegals to cross, including terrorists, Chinese nationals, hundreds now on the FBI's most wanted list. Cities like New York, nationwide, are declaring an emergency. Meanwhile, the Biden Department of Justice seeks to imprison President Joe Biden's chief political rival, something, well, you'd expect to see in Soviet Russia or communist China or even the old communist Cuba. Whistleblowers reveal that our president is involved in vast corruption, a scandal. The Biden administration directs multiple federal agencies to suppress reporting on that. The FBI launches domestic surveillance operations against Trump-affiliated voters ahead of the 2024 election. The idea that people you disagree with politically are somehow dangerous when there's no evidence of that really boggles the mind. Our own U.S. president increasingly exhibiting dementia, repeating stories, rambling incoherently, essentially declining to take questions about how America is going to react to this burgeoning scandal in Israel, to this horrific war in Israel. Public trust in government is reaching a historic low. American trust of the news media is so low that 50% say that the industry intentionally misleads them. All broadcast television, all cable news networks losing listeners and viewers by leaps and bounds. The EU, the United Kingdom, and the Biden administration attempting actively now to restrict alternative media, despite the breakthrough on X, formerly known as Twitter, which is rapidly becoming the most unencumbered, uncensored social media platform in the country. We still have mass-based censorship at virtually every other large social media platform. Inflation is worsening, outpacing 70s stagflation's crisis. Full-time employment is falling as the number of Americans holding multiple jobs nears historic highs. The bond market is crashing. Mortgage rates eclipse 8%, the highest in a generation. Medium home prices now unaffordable in 99% of America's counties across the country. Credit card debt is the highest in American history. Credit card interest rates are reaching a record high. Car loan debt is the highest in the nation, with interest rates the highest since 2001. Rapidly rising oil prices signal inflation starting to accelerate anew. The national debt, now legally unrestrained, topping $33 trillion. The number of illegals in New York City, according to the New York Post, has now literally doubled. And yet, more and more Americans tell us that they think the answer is the return of President Donald Trump. President Trump, who is leading now in the Republican polls and the general election polls, is cresting in terms of his political support in a counterintuitive move in which, surprisingly, the more he's indicted, the stronger he becomes politically. We are headed to what I think will be one of the most extraordinary presidential elections in American history. I saw Rachel Maddow the other day say that if Donald Trump wins this election, it'll probably be our last election. Well, I don't agree with that. In fact, I think the exact opposite is true. If Donald Trump does not win this election, I think it may be our last election. But the obstacles to a Trump election are not, at this point, at the ballot. They appear to me to be in the courtrooms. On today's show, David Schoen, perhaps America's most brilliant criminal defense attorney, who represented President Donald Trump in the first impeachment, joins us to analyze the legal hurdles that President Trump must surmount as he surges towards another term in the White House. Former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn joins us with his analysis of the situation both in the Middle East and in Ukraine. You certainly don't want to miss that. And then Troy Smith, the editor-in-chief of Rare.us, joins us to talk about Robert F. Kennedy's decision to bolt the Democratic Party of his uncle, President John F. Kennedy, and his father, New York Senator Robert Kennedy. There's a lot of political implications there for us to go through, but it's essentially a re-examination of the entire political record of Robert Kennedy. Could we have the first modern presidential campaign with a major third-party candidate since Ross Perot, who ran in both 92 and 96? It's all coming up, folks, on the Roger Stone Show right here on 77 WABC, so please don't touch that dial. The U.S. Senate voted unanimously last week to reverse a decision to relax the dress code in the United States Senate and to once again require jackets and ties for male senators and dresses for the lady members of the U.S. Senate. This caused Pennsylvania U.S. Senator, a man who frankly is barely lucid and who insists on wearing droopy basketball shorts, a baggy t-shirt, and a hoodie on the floor of the U.S. Senate to say that the states are not sending Washington their best and brightest. Senator, please take a moment to look in the mirror. And then, of course, midweek, President Donald Trump criticized the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. It was really kind of shocking candor by President Donald Trump, who revealed that at the very last minute, the Israeli state backed out of their involvement of the American decision to take out the terrorist Soleimani, causing the United States to go it alone. That was certainly news-making. Trump also said that the terrorists who launched a surprise attack on Israel were, quote, smart. That was a reference, I think, to their ability to launch their attack without any early warning or detection from either American intelligence or Israelis' vaunted intelligence capability. That's not praise for the terrorists. In fact, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Dwight Eisenhower all praised the military cunning of German General Erwin Rommel. That didn't mean that they approved of him or liked him. Late in the week, the DeSantis camp, kind of on its last legs, this is Ron DeSantis' presidential campaign, tried to turn this tidbit into a political conflagration. It really didn't work. Trump is, let's face it, I think still angry about the fact that Bibi Netanyahu congratulated Joe Biden on his election for president when the result of the 2020 election was still in dispute. After Trump signed the historic Abraham Accords and, of course, moved the capital to Jerusalem, you could see why the president was angry. You can understand it. But any implication that President Donald Trump approved of the actions by Hamas or was praising Hamas or Hezbollah, well, that's a false narrative. In the meantime, Governor Ron DeSantis, once so promising as a challenger to President Donald Trump, has put his campaign in New Hampshire, in South Carolina, and in Nevada on hold, putting all of his chips on Iowa. The problem with that, of course, is that he's banking heavily on the popularity of Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds. And while it is absolutely true that Iowa's Republican governor is extraordinarily popular, political support and endorsements are not transferable. It really doesn't work that way. I myself have seen polling just in the last 48 hours that shows that those with a 79% approval rating of Governor Reynolds are overwhelmingly more likely to vote for Donald Trump. So the real question becomes, I think, threefold. People tune into the Roger Stone Show because they want straight political analysis, and, well, that's what we're going to give you. I don't think Trump has ever been stronger in the 45 years that I have known him and studied, in the beginning, marketing research about him that pertained to his casino brand, but then later political polling. Perhaps it is a nostalgia for low gasoline prices, for low grocery prices, for low rates of inflation, for world peace. But there is no question that just in the last several days, seeing Trump pulled ahead by 9 points in Pennsylvania, by 10.5 points in a new poll in Michigan, by 9 points over in Wisconsin shows that the only obstacle to his return to the White House appears to me to be the legal problems that he faces in multiple courtrooms. David Schoen is going to join us in a bit, and he's going to talk very specifically about the recent case right there in New York City pertaining to the charges against the Trump Organization and Donald Trump's real estate empire. But remember, folks, that is just a civil proceeding, a proceeding in which Donald Trump was able, between court proceedings, to come out and hold stand-up press conferences, which I think, frankly, not from a legal point of view, because I'm not a lawyer, but from a political point of view, I think actually benefited him. I think the American people saw through the unfairness of this proceeding. First of all, it seems odd to people that any political proceeding like this would not include a jury trial. By the way, it is false information that Trump was not afforded a jury because one of his lawyers failed to check a box on a form in the court proceeding. In fact, Donald Trump was not entitled to a jury trial on this business matter, largely because Attorney General Letitia James brought this action under a state law that specifically does not allow a jury. Took a long time for the truth of that to get out in the American public. The truth of the matter is, Trump is now faced with a weak field of Republicans. Governor Ron DeSantis, as I predicted on the show, I think it was 2 weeks ago, is essentially out of cash. He has less than $5 million to try to finish the nominating process or to break through. And I can tell you, having been a veteran of 13 national presidential campaigns, well, that is very unlikely. I personally think that the next Republican presidential debate scheduled for Miami should be canceled. If it's anything like the last one, it's almost unwatchable. First of all, you had all of these candidates shouting over each other with their pre-scripted and carefully memorized lines. It was a train wreck from which no one is now emerging as an obvious alternative to Donald Trump. This is going to be one of the most extraordinary presidential campaigns in American history. As a political junkie, I really can't wait to see it. I do have one housekeeping matter that I have to review, and that is last Sunday, the day before Columbus Day, I had numerous requests from our listeners out there to walk through yet again my mother's, this would be my grandmother's recipe for Sunday gravy. Now, if you live in the New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia area, you might call it gravy or you might call it sauce, but the key thing is that it be good. And since we're here on a Sunday, if you don't have the ingredients today, you might want to get them in time for next Sunday's show, because this is not a quick process. First of all, this is the most important point. You absolutely must use San Marzano tomatoes. Now, San Marzano tomatoes are not a brand of tomatoes. San Marzano tomatoes are grown in a specific region of Italy, a specific valley, and there are multiple brands that sell it. You can go to Gristedes, and there are at least 3 different brands of San Marzano tomatoes. But be very careful when you read the label, because if it says San Marzano style tomatoes, that's not what you want. You want the genuine article. Now, you chop some onions and you mince some garlic and you saute that in an olive oil that is specifically designed for sauteing and frying. Again, there are several brands available at Gristedes. You might even try a garlic flavored olive oil. I've been doing that lately. It's pretty successful. And you first brown the onions until they are translucent. Then and only then do you add the minced garlic. The reason for that is that the burning point for garlic is much lower than it is for onions. And above all, you do not want to burn the garlic. If you burn the garlic, my friends, you have to throw the whole thing out and you have to start over. Now, the whole process here has to be done at a relatively low heat and very slowly. You cannot make a great Sunday gravy or a great sauce by doing it quickly. Once you have sauteed the onions and the garlic, I use a mix of ground beef, ground pork. If you can find it, I will find the uncased Italian sausage. But if that's unavailable, fresh ground pork will do. And then if you can afford the mortgage, well, you can also put in 1/3 ground veal, but is not an absolute necessity. You brown that, again, at a low heat, taking your time, and then you dump in 2 or 3 cans of the San Marzano tomatoes with the juice. Do not drain the juice. After that, I take 1 can of high-quality tomato paste and a like can of water, and I stir that into the mix. Now you add oregano, basil, marjoram, and salt and pepper to taste. You want to let that cook down, and you want it to I would say you want that to simmer for about 4 hours. You want to constantly stir. Essential that you never let your Sunday gravy burn. Keep it on a low heat. I sometimes use a trivet on the burner to stop it from having any possibility, after all that work, of burning. And after about 4 hours, you have the perfect Sunday gravy. We call it Sunday gravy a la Corbo, well, because that was my mother's maiden name. My people are from Sicily. I'm a proud member of the Italian American Civil Rights League. You can go to ItalianAmericanCivilRightsLeague.org. That is the new civil rights nonprofit, and I can't think of a better day for you to enjoy your Sunday gravy than a Sunday. There it is, folks, my mother's and grandmother's recipe for Sunday gravy. Thanks for joining us here on the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC. And when the show is over, don't forget to stay tuned for my good friend, Joe Piscopo, who will be back with Evenings with Sinatra. Welcome back. This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC Radio. And now it is my honor and privilege to welcome former National Security Advisor and Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. Mike Flynn is, to my mind, one of the most brilliant geopolitical and military strategists in the country. And he is a man who has, since leaving the service, dedicated his life to both the America First movement and to his church. And he welcomes us now on the Roger Stone Show.
Thank you, Roger. Thanks for having me, and to your great WABC radio audience. Your show has been it's a staple part of my weekly existence, and you've had some of the most amazing guests, to include obviously Donald Trump and many other really just special people that have helped expose a lot of truth and brought a lot of things to light. So thank you so much for what you're doing, and for your very dedicated and loyal audience. To all of you, just hang in there with us. And this is where you're going to find, just the pools of information that you're not going to find anywhere else through this great show that Roger has put together.
Well, I very much appreciate your joining us. You and I spoke this past Thursday night in what was for me a really almost shocking and revelatory conversation. Mm-hmm. Writing in the Western Journal this past week, you wrote, quote, "Nobody expected the war in Israel except for the enemies of Israel in America. The U.S. must think about this. The West as a whole is still in a state of complacency. We are mired in a losing effort in Ukraine, and Russia has been playing the U.S. like a fiddle. Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky know how much debt we are in and how much we spend into losing efforts in the Middle East. That would be Afghanistan and Iraq. Our enemies now dominate both of those countries." General Flynn, tell us about this conflict. Tell us how it happened without the Israeli intelligence seeming to know about it, and well, where are we potentially going from here?
Well, so let's just talk a couple of different levels, and I'll talk to them as levels of warfare, Roger. First, I appreciate you mentioning the article in the Western Journal. I actually think the United States of America is being played by both Zelensky and Putin in that geostrategic space in Eastern Europe. We've already poured in over $200 billion plus into that conflict. It's a losing conflict. It's a limited objective war. And frankly, we need to figure out, if we had good leadership in the White House, we need to figure out how to get out of that. In Israel, the tactical situation on the ground is very dynamic. Obviously, it's playing out all over social media. There is a propaganda war going on, as well as a real war, a real shooting war, and there are people that are dying on both sides. I mean, the tactical situation is such where it's very uncertain. I will tell you, even commanders on the ground that are not that far away from the front lines don't have a clear view of what is happening, until you're right there. And typically, what is happening at the tactical situation of warfare, happens so fast and only happens at the soldier level, right? The Israeli soldiers, young men, primarily young men, but young women as well, but primarily young men that are in these infantry frontline units are there. They're ready to sacrifice their lives for the sovereignty of their country in the state of Israel. They were brutally attacked by a barbaric enemy, and that's Hamas. I mean, all this is sort of known, and there's other enemies on the tactical level. Hezbollah up in the north, in the Lebanese border, and further up in the north, off of the Golan Heights, there's a couple of brigades in Syria, and I think the Israeli Defense Forces must pay very close attention to the strategic side of this war, because their borders are all at risk. This is what happens. So strategically, the initial surprise, I think there's going to have to be a substantial coming to Jesus, so to speak, particularly as we talk about the state of Israel and the city of Jerusalem. There's going to have to be a very serious, forthcoming investigation that's going to have to happen. I actually think that I know that they're doing some of that now because of the strategic surprise that enabled Hamas to have such a penetration of the state of Israel inside of the borders of Israel, as well as some of the other capabilities that they were able to unleash against the state of Israel and against the Israeli Defense Forces in the Southern Zone. I think the Southern Zone commander, whoever, if the Southern Zone commander has not been relieved of duty, should be. That would be me. That would be my recommendation. And find out what orders were given, because there's no way in the world that the Israeli Defense Forces were this unprepared or this unready. I have walked that fence line along the Gaza Strip. I have been at those gates. I've been in those towns. I've been in the bunkers. I've been in the surveillance towers, and I've witnessed their daily activities in terms of reconnaissance or surveillance of their borders of the Gaza Strip. So I know tactically and strategically what Israeli Defense Forces are supposed to do and also capable of doing. I think globally, and this is really the 60,000-foot level for your audience, we have a situation now where we have to be very, very careful. We now, the United States of America, because it has clearly come into our homeland. It is definitely into our homeland. This threat that we face, this global threat of terrorism, and we've always had it. It's always been there. It ebbs and flows. Obviously, under President Donald J. Trump, there was an ebbing of the tide where he stood up as a leader should, as a president of the United States of America should, and he basically let the rest of the world know that that there's a leader in charge, and I'm going to take action when and if necessary, and he did at certain times, and it kept our enemies at bay, and we don't have that right now in the White House. These are the consequences of elections. So our homeland right now is threatened. When we have state governors who have to issue emergency orders, when we have these protests and these, in some cases, violent protests, and here in the United States of America, we have the unknown factor of illegals that have been allowed to enter this country. We're talking about somewhere between 7. The numbers range, but I would say we're probably somewhere between 7 and 12 million people in the last 2 years alone. Many are from some of these nations that produce these terrorist elements and these terrorist organizations, whether it's the Middle East or whether it's North Africa or whether it's part of Central Asia or even parts of Southeast Asia. But clearly the Middle East and North Africa, and we know this. We know to the tune of tens of thousands. Those are just the reports that come from our Homeland Security. So we have a threat inside of this country, America, and to your audience, and it's very real. And it has to be dealt with. It has to be dealt with smart, disciplined leadership, with cool heads, and with a very strategic focus of how to deal with this. I mean, part of me says, every illegal that's here in this country, but this administration, don't hold your breath waiting for this administration to do this, but every illegal that we have has to be rounded up and sent back home. I mean, we cannot continue to have this incredible level of potential violence that could occur in this country, and we've already seen bits and pieces of it. I mean, the Antifa is just like the jihad that they call the jihad. To take this overseas briefly, Roger, I understand that the nation of France had to declare a state of emergency. And they're not declaring a state of emergency because of, the French people. They're declaring a state of emergency because the French allowed so much of this illegal immigration into their country for the last 10 years. Now, I will tell you, there's a lot of blame to throw around. There's a lot of people, a lot of administrations, they're both sides of the political aisle that you know so well and you speak so eloquently about. But we have a global problem right now. Israel, as I sit here today talking to you and your great audience, Israel today is at the center of it. This is not one of those wars like the 67 or the 73 war that Israel went through where it's going to be over in a couple of days or a couple of weeks. This is going to be a lasting war. and it's going to permeate out into the other parts of the world. It already has clearly around the world in some of the things that I already mentioned. So I think what we if I could sprinkle fairy dust on the United States of America, I would sprinkle fairy dust and have great global, smart, strategic leadership put back in charge of this country. But we don't, and I can't. And I wish that I could. But we must. So now we must put demands on those that we can. So for the American people, because this is really what it comes down to, I really want the American people to support those critical allies. This only democratic nation in this cesspool that is out there in the Middle East at times. And I know this. I've spent many years. I know many of these people that are leaders in some of these countries. This is not about them. This is about what they have allowed to do. And one other point that I'll make, and it has to do with Palestine, right? Why is it that the Israelis have to worry about Palestine? What is the rest of the Arab world doing about Palestine? That's a big question. I won't answer it here today, and it needs to be answered by the Arab world. It needs to be answered by these globalist leaders that continue to put the pressure on Israel to have to deal with the Palestinian issue, right? The Palestinian issue. What is the matter with the many other Arab nations? What is the matter with them, dealing with the Palestinian issue? Why aren't they taking them in? Why aren't they allowing states to be formed or bastions of Palestinians to be formed in their own countries instead of making this about Israel? I'll tell you the short answer is because they use it to further their intent, which is to destroy Israel. As Iran has said, we want to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. So there's so much at risk here, so much at stake. We can recover from all of this, if we pray and we pray that we have a fair election. We have some elections coming up next month for some really critical governors. We definitely have a very, very, I say everybody's always said the presidential elections are the most important. This is a historic presidential election coming up in 2024 for President Donald J. Trump. It is the most important in the history of our country, bar none, since George Washington decided not to be king and, in fact, took on the role of presidency. That's how important this is. This is it, folks. So we're here at the Reawaken America event in Miami. This is our 22nd city that we've been in. And what we're standing up telling everybody here and those that are online, we have about over 500,000 people online right now where I'm at. And we're telling people they have to get involved. I use the phrase local action has a national impact, and it does, but you have to decide to get off the couch, get out of the chair, take what it is that I'm saying and go figure out in your own communities how you're going to get involved in your communities, in your churches, in your families, in your counties, in your city councils, your school boards. That's how we take this country back. We have to take it back one county at a time, so to speak. Local action does have a national impact, and this country remains the strongest country on the planet because we have in our DNA, we have this fiber called freedom, and we will not relent. We will not give up that freedom. Believe me, we will not give it up. So, Roger, thank you so much for giving me this moment to go through that diatribe. I'll stand by for any other questions you have.
I appreciate that. Folks, if you're just tuning in, I'm Roger Stone. This is The Roger Stone Show, and we're interviewing former National Security Advisor and retired Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, talking about the situation both in the Middle East and in Ukraine. General Flynn, are you one of those who believes that the decision to unfreeze $6 billion worth of assets for Iran, and with Iran financing Hamas, that was a triggering event in this attack on Israel?
Absolutely. And one other thing that's being missed in a lot of the things I see on social media, everybody remembers we just recently had a prisoner swap. Okay, the United States of America never deals with terrorists, but we did. We dealt with the leading state sponsor of terrorism. So the $6 billion, there's actually a lot more than that. Remember the monies that were given by the Obama administration And there's more than the $6 billion. It's probably closer to 12 to 15 billion. And I want to throw in this. I want to touch on this prisoner swap that we did, and we got the the lousy end of that deal, right? So that was one of those. There's these seminal acts that if the United States takes them, then and they're not done for the benefit of our nation, then those who are our adversaries will take advantage of them. And that's what we're seeing right now. So absolutely, a triggering event or events plural that we have seen by this administration to continue to kowtow to really the real enemy here is Iran aligned with China. Okay. And I don't want anybody to forget that. These other actions that we've seen inside of our government, where we have this what amounts to a spy network inside of our Department of Defense. We have people inside of our National Security Council, and we have people inside of the State Department. This recent, basically removal of essentially the envoy to Iran, the removal of him and his removal of his security clearance. Why? You don't do that unless there's a problem, a big problem. And so there are a couple of actions that have been exposed now because we, the people, are putting in greater demands. We're putting on greater demands. We're not allowing our voices to be limited. We are fighting hard to expand our voices. Your show, Roger, this particular show, this WABC radio show, with Roger Stone, this is one of those independent voices that continues to pound the table on what is America supposed to be? Who are we supposed to be, right? We're supposed to be the shining city on the hill, as Ronald Reagan, somebody who you knew and worked for, said. And so we have to continue to be that world leader, but we will only be the world leader with great global leadership and not globalist leadership that we are having forced down our throats through this, I will say it, this ungodly group of people, and I mean that precisely, ungodly group of people in running our country. So yeah, triggering events. There was not just that. There was plural triggering events, and the enemies took advantage. Of course they're going to take advantage of us, and they did. And now we see what the consequence of that is. Never mind the consequence of a stolen election.
In 1973, almost 50 years ago last weekend, Israel was caught short by a surprise attack by the Egyptians and the Syrians. There was a complete failure of intelligence by Israel. They were caught short on ammunition. They literally had their backs to the sea. And Israel was unilaterally saved from total annihilation by President Richard Nixon, who, over the objections of Dr. Henry Kissinger, his national security advisor, Admiral Thomas Moore, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and essentially the entire foreign policy apparatus of the Nixon administration, decided to airdrop $36 million worth of lethal aid to the Israelis, which Golda Meir herself credited with saving Israel. My question is, how is it possible with Israeli intelligence, and for that matter, American intelligence, the Israelis have been caught by surprise by this attack?
Yeah, and I'm glad you combined both Israeli intelligence and American intelligence. We have a very, very strong and a very long-lasting intelligence relationship with the state of Israel. Very close. We work very, very, very closely with them, and they have some extraordinary capabilities. And this is speculation on my part, and this is, I've only talked about this to a couple of people. This is pure speculation to your audience, because there's no way in the world. As I said earlier, Roger, I've walked that line. I've been down in Derat. I've been in Ashkelon. I've been up in the towers. I've watched the Israelis conduct their rotations along the border, their surveillance, their reconnaissance. I've watched this. I've witnessed it. I know exactly how they operate. the only way, and this again, I'm speculating here because I don't know this for a fact, but it's the only way that I can figure that this surprise, both tactical and strategic level of surprise occurred, that there must have been some type of stand down order given for the period of time from, like, let's just say from the day of the attack, like let's just say 0400 Israeli time, which is, I think they're plus 5 or 6 hours ahead of us. But let's just say 0400 to about, 08, 0900 hours. There had to have been a stand down order. If I were Bibi Netanyahu or if I was the head of the Israeli Defense Forces, I would immediately, even while we're fighting, because the troops on the ground, the subordinate commanders, they know exactly what they need to do. They know how to fight. They know how to conduct the tactics of an engagement and the tactics of the battles that they're involved in. They have the strategic intent of not only Prime Minister Netanyahu but their chief of the defense forces. I would be looking at I would be looking at answering this question and answering it immediately, because the entire world is asking it. And you know what? If you don't answer it quickly, Israel, if you don't answer it quickly, then there is going to be an even greater perceived weakness of your abilities. And one thing I know about the Israelis is that they are not, they will not come across as weak. They are not weak. That is not a weak society or culture. And they are strong, and they're going to remain strong, and they're going to remain united. But I do think that to overcome this perceived weakness, because it is a perceived weakness right now strategically, that maybe they're not as good as they used to be, so to speak, that I think that there has to be some statements or something that comes out, because there's no way in the world that this happened if the Israelis were doing what they've always been doing for a long, long time, because of the wars that we've talked about, because of the 67 and the 73 war and other wars that they've been involved in, up in the northern border as well, the Northern Zone Command. So they've got to answer this question. So for those that are listening that can, and I have said this, I really, really believe that if there was a stand down order, somebody gave that. I hope that that's not the case. I pray that that's not the case. But I can't imagine any other thing that would have caused this massive, massive strategic breakdown in the security of the state of Israel that has probably one of the strongest borders, if you will, in all of the places up along the Golani Heights, up along the northern border of Lebanon, and clearly along the Gaza Strip, and also even coming and going into Jordan, which they actually, Israelis and the Jordanians have a great relationship, as they do with the Egyptians. So I do think that has to be answered quickly, because it'll demonstrate to the world that we've identified a weakness in our defense, in our security, and we've fixed it, we've corrected it. And if it means that there's people involved, they need to be taken in and figured out. I mean, there's got to be a human in the loop here that broke down, or humans in the loop that broke down. It's the only thing I can, and that's, again, it's speculation on this stand down, but I just can't see how this incredibly secure border could have broke down that long for that amount of time. We're talking 4 to 6, maybe 8 hours, where Hamas was inside of Israel and holding positions, holding terrain, and holding ground. Doesn't happen in the Israeli Defense Force and the system of security and surveillance that they have. It should not happen. So it's a demonstrated weakness, and it's a weakness that their enemies will continue to take apart if Israel doesn't come out and say, "Look, we have fixed this."
Do you think that this horrific action in Israel was partially triggered by the fact that there was, I think, credible speculation that the Saudis and the Israelis were moving towards a new cooperative peace agreement?
Absolutely. And all you have to do is look at some of the statements. So for those that pay real close attention to this, all these strategic geopolitical folks that are pundits on TV or whatever, and others, look at the statements that come out of the various countries. And it's not just that they make a statement in support of Palestine or something. It's read the statement and really look hard at the words that they choose to use in their statements. And one of the greatest nemesis of against each other in the Middle East is Iran and Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and they're at war. They're at war right now, and the Iranians fight that war through the Houthi movement down in Yemen, in the southern part of Saudi Arabia. It's been going on for a long time. The Iranians have provided the Houthi movement down there. They provided them missiles that can range Israel from Yemen. Why would you put missiles down in Yemen that can range Israel from Yemen, Iran, right? So yeah, I think that these various conditions or criteria, as you're pointing out, these trigger issues or elements, it's criteria that and conditions that occur strategically that we have to pay really close attention to. And these are the things, back to U.S. intelligence. This is my life, especially at the strategic level, where you're dealing with what's called indications and warnings that tell you that some conditions geostrategically, geopolitically, tactically have changed on the ground, some part of the world, right? There's some, a new political leader, a new weapon system, a deployment of a naval force from some other, or an air force from some other country, right? There's different conditions that exist. And these are the conditions that, from a U.S. intelligence perspective, there's probably a breakdown there, too, because we clearly weren't paying attention to the indicators and warnings for what just happened here in the last week. And that relationship between Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Iran matters a lot in this, in the consequences of what we're about to face here. And you heard me say this last night, Roger, when we were together. This is going to get harder, folks. I kidded because somebody asked me and somebody in the audience said God wins. And I said, yeah, but the book of Revelations, has two other parts before God wins. And the first one is it's really hard. Things are really hard. The second thing is that it's going to get worse. And then, of course, in the end, God wins. Well, I believe that. But we are only in step one, where things are really bad right now over there. The things are going to get worse before there's victory here on earth. That is, I do believe that the truth, the light, and unification of those who believe in freedom, those who believe in democracy, those who believe in a way of life that is not filled with hate and a barbaric desire for blood. This blood lust that seems that some of these people seem to have. We cannot have that on this planet. What we've got to have is we've got to have unification. We've got to have a desire for freedom, strong desire for freedom. And and I'll finish with this, Roger. I wrote this down, and I said it to a group of people this morning. That this really comes from one of our founders, and I'll say here in a second who it was. He said, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." Now, that's Benjamin Franklin. And that's why I get back to what I said earlier about local action, right? You can't sit there and wring your hands and huddle in your home and think that everything's going to be okay. We, the people in this country, the citizenry of America, have to get involved. I mean, one of the ways to get involved is to pray. That's fine. But there are other ways to get involved. And I mean that, in earnest and wholeheartedly do I mean it. And what we're witnessing in the Middle East is here in our homeland, and is not. There's still great sacrifices ahead. So pray for the people of Israel. Pray for a divine outcome. Myself and somebody else who Roger Clay Clark. We were just talking about George Washington. George Washington, by all rights, when you think about it, should have never beaten the greatest army and the greatest navy in the history of the world at that time, the British, right? And there was no way in the world that he could have won with what he had, a ragtag group of militia. But he did. And George Washington, in his own words, in his own writing, used to talk about divine intervention and this spiritual component of the war, that the cause, as he called it, the cause, that we now refer to it as the American Revolution, because we're in a spiritual revolution now in this country and in this world. And it is the globalists who are trying to take over from, humanity. And I call it, and taking it back to America, it's the globalists globalism versus Americanism. And so I want the American people to stand up, step up, and speak up, and do it in a way that's peaceful, do it in a way that is smart, do it in a way that's disciplined, but do it. You have to do it.
All right, unfortunately, we are out of time. General Michael Flynn, thank you so much for joining us here on The Roger Stone Show.
God bless, Roger. Thank you.
This episode is brought to you by Loom by Atlassian. Are you feeling stuck at work? Get your team unstuck with Loom video messaging and move work forward. Use Loom to simultaneously record both your screen and yourself to share a quick update, provide feedback, train a colleague, and everything in between. Plus, add Loom AI to your meetings for instant written notes and recordings. Try Loom today at Loom.com. That's LOOM.com.
This episode is brought to you by GMC. When you have 4 new tires, every drive feels fresh. Right now, buy 3 select tires and get 1 for just $1 during the GMC Certified Service Fresh Start Tire Event. Visit gmc.com/service offers or see dealer for full details. At participating U.S. GM dealers only. Highest or equal value tire will be $1. Offer ends 5/31/2025. Not available with other offers.
It's the Smucker's Uncrustables podcast with your host, Uncrustables. Okay, today's guest is rough around the edges. Please welcome Crust.
Thanks for having me.
Today's topic, he's round with soft, pillowy bread.
Hey.
Filled with delicious PB&J.
Are you talking about yourself?
And you can take him anywhere.
Why'd you invite?
And we are out of time.
Are you really cutting me off?
Uncrustables are the best part of the sandwich. Sorry, Crust.
PMS, pregnancy, menopause. Being a woman is a lot. Ollie supports you and yours with expert solutions for every age and life stage. They just launched 2 new products exclusively at Walmart. Period Hero combats bloat, mood swings, and more during PMS. And Balance Perimeno to support hormonal balance, mood, and metabolism during perimenopause. Grab yours at Ollie.com.
Ollie!
These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
This is The Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, here's Roger Stone.
Welcome back. This is Roger Stone on the Roger Stone Show here at 77 WABC Radio. 77 WABC, where we're making AM radio great again. Don't forget to grab that 77 WABC radio app, download it to your cell phone so you don't miss any of the amazing programming, commentary, or entertainment we have here at 77 WABC. Joining me now to talk about the decision announced this past week by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to become an independent candidate for president, the first major independent candidate for president since billionaire Ross Perot, is Troy Smith, who is the editor-in-chief of Rare.us. He joins us now to discuss an extraordinary piece that he published this week entitled RFK's Independent Candidacy Raises a Re-Examination of His Record. Troy Smith of Rare.us, welcome to the Roger Stone Show.
Roger, it is an honor to be here on the radio with you today to discuss Robert F. Kennedy's, independent candidacy, especially at this time where the election's heating up and we have so many different factors coming in an attempt to interfere with the election from people that have been doing this for a long time. So it's an honor to be here and to speak with you on this topic today.
Well, you're quite a writer. This piece caught my eye. To set the table here, if I must, I have only met Robert F. Kennedy one time. It was a conference at which we both spoke. I'm impressed with him. He is highly intelligent. He's an extraordinarily, I think, effective candidate, despite his, what I think is a congenital speech impediment, which he does not let get in the way of his being an extraordinarily effective communicator. He has a very positive, upbeat, unifying message. Almost reminds me of Ronald Reagan in that sense. But I now think that he has undertaken an extraordinarily different course. First of all, those all over social media who say that I have advised him to run, that I am urged him to run, that I am advising his campaign, that's nonsense. I'm 100% for Donald Trump. Everyone knows it. I do admire a couple of Robert Kennedy's issue positions, particularly the ones that he has stressed, health freedom, a closing our southern border, a healthy skepticism, and a deep understanding of the actual history in Ukraine. But that's not the complete story of Robert Kennedy, is it?
No, it's not, Roger. And when people are looking at, this field now with RFK as an independent, I think it's important to remember that RFK peaked at 19% in Democrat polls. So this guy didn't see a lot of Democrat support, really. And if he did, he would still be in the race as a Democrat. Now, it's interesting when you look at who is supporting Kennedy, because it's largely a conservative group that is his base. And really, when you dive into his causes, the things that he's promoted over the years, he's very pro-abortion. He has endorsed people like Hillary Clinton, Al Gore, Barack Obama, Bernie Sanders, Gavin Newsom. He's called the NRA a terrorist group in 2018. And he wants to outlaw fracking. And just keep in mind, folks, when we talk about outlawing fracking, the Marcellus Shale reserve of natural gas in the Northeast United States has enough energy in it to power the world for over 100 years. So when we talk about outlawing fracking, we are talking about stopping the development of economies not only here, but around the world. And on green energy, Roger, I mean, there is literally no distinction between Robert F. Kennedy and Greta Thunberg. And it's interesting to see these conservatives line up behind his campaign. It's almost as if they are not aware of his history, or maybe they're only focusing on some of the things that you talked about that I think the Trump base and conservatives could get behind, like stopping the war in Ukraine and things of that nature.
Well, part of this may be the fact that he has essentially been blackballed by the mainstream media. So even when he did get very briefly at the beginning of his Democratic candidacy on, say, ABC, NBC, CBS, his interviews were very heavily edited because the producers decided that they didn't want him spreading quote-unquote disinformation. And then after that, he gets no coverage at all out of MSNBC or CNN, other than to say negative coverage, branding him as a conspiracy theorist because his very articulate questioning of the safety and the effectiveness of the COVID-19 vaccination, as well as other vaccinations. And therefore, his campaign to date has pretty much largely been covered by podcast media, by alternative podcast media like Joe Rogan, for example, who is an iconoclast and covers subjects left and right. But beyond that, it has been alternative conservative media, which is committed to no censorship, which has given him a platform, which I think may have led people to believe that he may be more conservative than he actually is.
Well, exactly, Roger. And when you look at why the media blackballed him, it's very telling. We look at his COVID vaccine stance, and there's a broader anti-vaccine sentiment that's there. And that was probably, like you said, I think the biggest reason he was blackballed. But I think another big piece of this is something that we've also covered on Rare.us, which is his belief that the CIA was involved in the murder of his father, RFK Sr., and his uncle, JFK. And I think that when you examine that, I think the American people, somebody who is censored by the media, somebody who is a target of the same censorship that Donald Trump endured, is going to resonate with the American people. And I think that in their rush to find people that are making sense, I mean, it's no short order that we have people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on TV. When you put RFK, even with his speech problems, he's so eloquent, and he actually speaks about the things that Americans care about. When you put him next to the politicians really on the left or the right, I think he kind of shows them up, even with his problems. So you're kind of putting these false idols next to somebody who, say what you want about RFK, he actually has had a legitimate career. Politically, I think there's a lot of things that conservatives would disagree with, but he's not somebody who has, kind of lived off of the government dole like Bernie Sanders or somebody like that. This is somebody who has actually lived in the private sector. So it's not to me, it's more about the fact that he actually has substance, whereas most of the political types in Washington, D.C. and around the country really have no substance at all. So that is resonating with the American people.
I think one of the questions that people don't focus on is how difficult it is to actually get on the ballot as an independent candidate for president, not a minor party candidate for president, which, by the way, is difficult enough as it is, but as a independent party candidate. This is a process in which you have 50 different state laws, and the state laws are written by Republicans and Democrats working together to make ballot access as difficult as humanly possible. You see, the major party candidates don't want competition, and therefore these state laws are written in such a way to be as complicated, as arcane, as expensive, as labor intensive as you can possibly imagine. Now, there are a few states, they tend to be smaller states, where you just pay a simple filing fee and you get on the ballot. But in order to be a truly viable presidential campaign, Robert F. Kennedy has to get on the ballot in enough states to theoretically win 270 electoral votes. That's the number of votes that one needs to be elected president. This is no small or mean feat. I worked with Governor Gary Johnson, the former governor of New Mexico, in 2012. I briefly bolted the party of Lincoln myself when they nominated Mitt Romney. I'm still proud of it. Gary Johnson was a fine and qualified Libertarian Party candidate for governor. He was a conservative-oriented libertarian. But the party status at that time gave you automatic ballot access in about 30 states, and then you only had to petition your way on in another 20 states. And the party spent a full year planning and budgeting for that effort. I'm still not convinced that Robert Kennedy has the horsepower, both financially and in terms of bodies, to qualify to get on the ballot. Let me also say that the time frame that they afford you to do this is purposely extraordinarily short. So they typically require a very large number of deadly accurate certified voter signatures on a petition that must be collected in a very short period of time. Here's the big parlor game in American politics today, and that is, if he is on the ballot as an independent, and that is an enormous if, as I just stated, does he take a disproportionate number of votes from President Donald Trump, the presumptive Republican nominee, or does he take a disproportionate number of votes from Joe Biden or whoever ends up as the Democratic Party nominee? A Zogby poll put out by a super PAC affiliated with Robert F. Kennedy would tell you that he takes a disproportionate but small number of votes from Donald Trump, whereas a Rasmussen poll would show you that he takes a disproportionate number of votes, in this case, from Joe Biden. I think it's extraordinarily early to make any of those calculations. Troy, what do you think?
Well, Roger, I think you're right in saying that it's early, but what I'm looking at is basically, I mean, look, if RFK was pulling a disproportionate amount of votes from Biden, he would still be running as a Democrat for president. He decided to run as an independent because his support is more broad across the board, and the fact is his voter base couldn't vote in the Democrat primaries in a lot of states, and they couldn't support him. So this guy has decided to run as an independent because he doesn't have the Democrat support necessary to challenge Biden for the nomination. Now, if we're talking about RFK as an independent, I could see him doing well in New England and around Boston and things like that. I could see him doing well, but I don't see him challenging Joe Biden for the state. This is a guy that's going to perform decently, I wouldn't say he's going to be over 19% or anything like that. I mean, he'll pull a little bit from Joe Biden in the blue states, but what the damage that's going to be done is if he's able to get on the ballot in, say, a Texas that has become closer and closer over the years, or a Florida that even most of the time is pretty close. We see he's going to pull disproportionately from Trump. And in states where the Democrats have been expanding their presence in the cities and expanding their ability to manipulate the vote counts and things of that nature, we're going to get into a very serious situation where RFK may be pulling just enough from Trump to hand Biden or whoever the Democrat is a state that we never thought they could win. I'm not really sure what these people are saying when they say that RFK is going to pull disproportionately from Joe Biden, and that's only the case. I mean, I'm not seeing that. I don't think any of the evidence indicates that that's a fact, or there's any evidence that would confirm that. And the idea that he's pulling from Biden is really, in my opinion, just false. We're talking about somebody who's going to pull disproportionately from the conservative voter base that will be turning out for Donald Trump in 2024.
Well, it remains to be seen. One of the things we do know historically when it comes to independent candidates is that they always run stronger earlier in the campaign. But then as Election Day approaches and more voters begin to realize that their candidate has no actual chance to win, and that a vote for that candidate may inadvertently elect the candidate for president they want the least, their voter for support tends to fade. I think that could very much be a possibility here. The further revelations about Robert Kennedy, I think, are going to hurt him among Trump voters. For example, he was a major advocate and mouthpiece for the Russian collusion hoax. The idea that Russian intelligence conspired with Donald Trump's campaign to somehow win the 2016 election. He said about it. I said it in interviews. He said it in social media. I think most Trump supporters find that absolute anathema, but it seems to have been lost. I virtually guarantee you that if Kennedy is viewed later in this campaign as a challenge to Donald Trump, Trump's campaign and his supporters are going to bring that up. You also have the question of reparations, which I think would also be unpopular with the base of Trump voters. That is an issue that Robert Kennedy has expounded on substantially. So I think there's going to be an overall re-examination of Robert Kennedy's campaign. Folks, if you're just tuning in, this is Roger Stone. This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC Radio. And we're talking with Troy Smith, editor-in-chief of Rare.us. And he has a seminal piece in which he reassesses the independent candidacy of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And we are talking about that. Do not miss this opportunity to go download the 77 WABC radio app on your cell phone so you don't miss any of the great programming just like the one we're doing right now. Troy, the other question here is one that many people I think are a bit naive about, and that is there is no legal requirement that candidates for President of the United States engage in a televised debate. The Presidential Commission on Debates is not appointed by the president, is not a commission, and it is most certainly not about debate, meaning this mechanism has traditionally been used to limit debate. Now, the presidential debates back at the time of Nixon and Kennedy were actually sponsored by the League of Women Voters. That is no longer the case. And the Presidential Commission on Debates is chaired by the Republican and Democratic Party chairpeople, and their goal is to limit debate. And the way they do that is by saying, well, your ability to participate in the debate is not based on how many states you're on the ballot in, but more precisely where you stand in the polls. So you have a chicken and egg situation in which you can't expand your support because you can't get in the debates, and you can't get into the debates because you don't have a high enough level of support. I can't see, if Joe Biden is the Democratic nominee, that his handlers are going to be anxious to let him go into a debate with Donald Trump. People keep saying to me, well, when Robert Kennedy gets into these debates, that's his opportunity to score. The problem here is, by either criteria, since we don't know how many states he's going to get in the ballot on, and we still haven't seen his public support break 20%, certainly not as an independent, where he seems to hover around 17. And I can tell you the Presidential Commission on Debates will quickly go change that threshold to 20, and even 25 if they need to. I'm not sure that there's any guarantee that we will have presidential debates. We have not had them in every presidential campaign. We have only had them in recent presidential campaigns. And I think this would be an enormous disadvantage for Robert Kennedy.
Oh, absolutely. I think that there's no guarantee that he's going to be on the debate stage. And just for context for people out there, I come from the state of Maryland, Roger, and there I worked with several independent candidates. One man that was running for governor, Kyle Sevchek, and he was an independent candidate, just like RFK would be running, but just on a state level. And the amount of signatures that this guy had to get. It was over 10,000, and not only that, but when he would turn in the signatures, because I was there for the process, I watched it happen. They would throw out at least 30 to 40% of the signatures because something was written in a way that they couldn't understand it, and we're talking just the most minute details of the signature and the date and everything. I mean, they are so eager to throw away these signatures. So getting on the ballot, it's really not the cakewalk that people think. And when we look at RFK Jr. yesterday, he was in Orlando, and you're looking at the event, and there's like 40 people there. And I'm sorry, but with 40 people in Florida, which has a huge population, you're not going to get the signatures you need, or, in a lot of these states, you're not going to get the signatures you need because, again, people, 50 states, there's 50 different state laws on how they have to do this and how they have to get on the ballot and the percentage of the voters that they need for a petition. And as Roger said, some of them you just walk in and pay your money. So it's no guarantee that he's going to even be on the ballot in enough states to compete for the election here. So I really, I think you're right, Roger, in that it's a new flashy thing that he's running as an independent. But we saw that with his Democrat announcement too. He rose immediately, 19%. He pretty much was at his peak almost immediately, and from there he slid down and down and down. And that's what I think we're going to see in this case too. I think people are excited right now, especially people who think that are in love with the idea of another Kennedy being president. And that is going to die down as we get closer. And as you said, with the blackballing going on in the media, and with them preventing him from getting to the debate, and also preventing him from getting on the ballot in many states, there seems to be, in my opinion, no feasible way that he could represent a threat other than getting on the ballot in some of these very close states and pulling a disproportionate amount of voters from Donald Trump, which leads me to question whether this is yet another attempt by the Democrats, by the establishment political class, to get Trump by 1,000 cuts. If they can't indict him, they will simply insert as many people into the race as possible to try to stop his run in 2024. And we see this with candidates like Chris Christie, who is not, obviously he's not running because, you take a look at the guy, it's unbelievable, but he's not actually politically running either. He's running an attack campaign on Donald Trump. And when you look at across the board, a lot of these people are not candidates of substance in the Republican primary. They are candidates that are literally just there to attack Donald Trump and to raise money. And RFK right now, whether he intended to be or not, represents somebody who is one of those cuts. He's one of those establishment cuts that the political class is trying to, inflict on Donald Trump and prevent him from becoming president. And I think that's what the American people need to understand the most about this candidacy.
One of the most riveting pieces of television that I've seen in recent years was an interview this past week in which Sean Hannity confronted Robert Kennedy about his past endorsements of Al Gore, John Kerry, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, by the way, in both 2016 and 2020 when she was running against Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders, and Gavin Newsom. Hannity also confronted Robert Kennedy for calling the National Rifle Association a terror group in 2018. What surprised me was that Kennedy, who is usually very fast on his feet, seemed extremely ill-prepared for this question, and the aggressiveness of Sean Hannity. It was riveting television, but Robert Kennedy seemed to be literally sputtering.
Well, I think that I was shocked too to see Hannity do that because, I'm not the biggest fan of Sean Hannity, but, he did a great job there in kind of taking down RFK. He really held his feet to the fire, and that's what needs to be done because I think there's a consensus out there, like you said, Roger, because of the way that Kennedy's been covered in conservative media circles, that he is, in fact, conservative. You and I were there in 2016, Roger. I mean, we were all there as Americans. And if you were saying to yourself that you wanted Hillary Clinton to be president, I seriously question your judgment. And I got to be honest, I know that his condition with the speech is just it's a condition, and it's not about his thought process. It's not about, it's just about his, vocal ability. But I'm just saying it's not a good look for the United States to have a president that speaks the way he does. And I question whether, when you get into these backdoor discussions with these other world leaders and you have to be tough and you have to be strong, it just comes off as weak. And if he's unprepared for a question from Sean Hannity, Lord knows, how prepared he would be to deal with, the people in Iran or any of the chaos that we see right now. It's just, I just don't think that, looking at the evidence here for this piece and publishing this, it doesn't seem to me like this guy is prepared to be president and in any way.
Well, this is an area I'm going to disagree. I actually think while his congenital speech condition is a little off-putting at the beginning, after a few minutes, frankly, I barely notice it. As I say, I think he's extraordinarily knowledgeable. He's very, very good on his feet. I have, with the one exception where he seems to have been flummoxed by Sean Hannity, I've actually never seen him in any interview with anyone where he made an assertion that he could not back up with extensive documentation or a government study and so on. So I think that he is not to be underestimated in terms of his candidate skills, but I do think once it becomes clear where his votes are coming from, if he gets on the ballot, then you're going to see, for example, that bite of videotape of him endorsing Hillary Clinton in 2016 in a television ad. Or you're going to see ads branding him as anti-vaccination if the Democrats believe that he is pulling from them. So this is a very early but I think intriguing conversation. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but I want to thank our guest, Troy Smith, the editor-in-chief of Rare.us, for joining us on this beautiful Sunday for a discussion of the newly minted independent candidacy of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Troy, thank you for joining us on The Roger Stone Show.
It's an honor, Roger, and I just want to make it clear for the people out there that, I think that going to Rare.us, we just put up the article. We'll make sure that it's front and center for everybody to see on Rare.us. I want people to check that out, and I want people to understand that when we limit American energy, when we limit the production of natural gas and oil, we destroy our chances of building the third world, continuing to build the United States. This is about the progress of humanity. And anybody that wants to take away our ability to access the God-given energy under our feet stands to basically destroy the chances of building a better future. So I want people to keep that in mind, and I want them to go to Rare.us. And I thank you, Roger, for the honor of talking to you on this show.
All right. Thank you, Troy Smith. This is The Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC, and we'll be right back.
Parents of tweens, if you're familiar with far-off drop-offs...
Dad, stop, right here.
Or get DMs about what's for dinner, you may be experiencing tween milestones. For your son or daughter, these can start at age 9. HPV vaccination, a type of cancer prevention against certain HPV-related cancers, can start then too.
For most, HPV clears on its own. But for those who don't clear the virus, it can cause certain cancers later in life.
Embrace this phase. Help protect them in the next.
Ask their doctor today about HPV vaccination. Brought to you by Merck.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. 3 couples, 4 vacations, a lot to unpack. Watch The Four Seasons, a new series starring comedy favorites Tina Fey, Steve Carell, Will Forte, Coleman Domingo, and more in a hilarious and heartfelt love letter to long-term relationships. Based on the original Alan Alda film. Watch The Four Seasons, streaming now only on Netflix.
In golf, precision is everything, on and off the course. PGA of America chose advanced 5G solutions from T-Mobile for Business for smooth operations and seamless transactions. Together, we enhance ticketing and concessions for better fan experiences from gate to green. This is pro-level efficiency. This is PGA of America with T-Mobile for Business. Take your business further at T-Mobile.com/now.
5 immersive worlds, 1 amazing theme park. Get ready to explore the all-new Universal Epic Universe, featuring the wizarding world of Harry Potter, Ministry of Magic, Super Nintendo World, How to Train Your Dragon, Isle of Berk, and Dark Universe. Epic Universe opens May 22nd at Universal Orlando Resort. Our universe will never be the same. Tickets and packages on sale now at universalorlando.com.
This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, here's Roger Stone.
This is a Roger Stone, and this is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC. Joining me today is one of the country's most prominent and respected criminal defense attorneys, David Schoen. Very ably represented President Donald Trump in his first impeachment, and he is a shrewd analyst, not only of the courtroom and legal situations, but he is that rare lawyer who understands the impact of media coverage, politics, and the entire overlay that one must take into consideration in analyzing any legal case that is extraordinarily prominent. I am particularly honored to have David Schoen. Welcome to the show here, David.
It's my honor to be on it. Thank you very much.
So, David, from a political point of view, and I'm just a political analyst, I'm obviously not an attorney, but I have never seen political strength like this on behalf of President Donald Trump in a way that is counterintuitive. His candidacy for president, his ability to raise the resources for a candidacy for president, his poll numbers have merely gained with every civil or criminal indictment against him in any and every jurisdiction. Normally speaking, when a candidate for public office is charged with a criminal offense, their money dries up, their support dries up, and very soon their candidacy dries up. What I've seen here is the exact opposite, and therefore I have fewer and fewer reservations about Donald Trump's ability to win the White House in the next election. My only concern, I should say my largest concern, is this tsunami of lawfare that has been filed against him. So I'd like to go into these cases kind of one by one to get your expert analysis, because I'm trying to figure out how this all comes out. The case that has gotten the most coverage recently, it's a civil case. It is a case in which New York State Attorney General Letitia James essentially accused the Trump Organization, Donald Trump, and other executive members of his family of, I'm not really sure, of evaluating the value of assets in order to get loans from banks, loans that appear to me to have been paid back in full. What is this all about?
All right, so great question, of course, since it's coming from you. I want to just remark on your prefatory comment that you're only coming at this from a political perspective. I think, quite frankly, that is the primary perspective that's most important here, because I think that each of these prosecutions and the civil case are politically motivated. They're to advance a partisan political agenda, stop Donald Trump at all costs. I think it reflects back to Jerry Nadler's comment in Congress, we can't trust the voters. Therefore, that is an un-American comment as I've ever heard, especially from a congressman. And the idea is that all energies have to be marshaled to stop President Trump from becoming president again. I think that's what's at the heart of it. But, yeah, I think that this present case being litigated in New York certainly highlights the problem. Each of them does in its own reason. This case, just so that the listeners are aware, is, you hit some of the central points, but it's an extremely broad and subject to abuse law called New York Executive Law 6312, 12 in parentheses, gives very broad powers to the Attorney General. It gives virtually unfettered powers, gives very broad powers to a judge in this case who has already proven himself to be a political partisan, a Trump hater. And unlike every other fraud statute, it doesn't require any victim in the case, any loss. You said, you understood bank loans have been paid back. Of course, that's right. Usually, the traditional notion of fraud is someone says or does something, and somebody else relies on that to their detriment. That's sort of the definition of fraud, a material fact somebody else relies on to their detriment. Somebody's hurt by it. This statute doesn't require that at all. In fact, there's a case under it that says the traditional elements of fraud have been abandoned under this statute. And so it's just up to the discretion of a judge, who in this case appears to be usurping the role of expert witnesses on valuation. But basically the case is just what you said. They're accusing President Trump of overstating the values of properties, undercut credibility-wise, of course, by the reference to Mar-a-Lago being valued at perhaps $18 million in reality. Bears no resemblance to reality. Nobody could pick up that kind of property for any multiple of that number. But so that's what we're talking about. So even if it were puffery, so to speak, they're penalizing that now. They want to strip him of his business licenses in New York. They want to have someone else take over some of his properties and run his business because they don't like the valuation he put on it. Even though no one ever relied to that to their detriment, nobody lost anything. He's Donald Trump. They completely devalue the value of the brand of Trump. That's why his properties, one of the reasons why his properties are worth more than somebody might otherwise think, even objectively. They're the kinds of properties that some foreigner might come, if they were able to afford it, would pay many multiples market value for, and that's all relevant to valuation. It's an absurd case, but if anyone wondered, why it's brought, they should look at the timing. It's not coincidental that this is brought during the election year, and especially now he's leading in the polls by far. Same reason the other cases were brought. Donald Trump, as you well know, you've known him a lot longer than I have and a lot better, has been operating his businesses as an international brand for decades. Why all of a sudden now, in the course of an election campaign, do they choose to bring this? And what should be most offensive, perhaps, to the listeners is by a prosecutor who ran on a platform of getting Donald Trump. That doesn't go ethically in our system. We don't have prosecutors who single out citizens they don't like or they're afraid of or they don't want to be holding public office and single them out to go after with the resources of the state. It's outrageous. It's unethical. Never should have happened. But that's last thing I want to say. I know I'm talking an awful lot. The last thing I want to say is that, to me, is partially what explains his a resounding lead in the polls. I think it's certainly policy-based and all of that. People harken back to that time instead of this kind of economy and this kind of world, unstable world, that sort of thing. But I think basically Americans are fair-minded, and they see this piling on, and they see these kinds of claims. They don't understand a fraud claim without any loss, that sort of thing. And I think that catapults them even higher in the polls. That's my view.
So it is my understanding in this particular case, while the appeals court stayed any immediate action regarding the status of his business licenses or his properties, they did not stay the actual trial, which will now go forward, correct?
That's right. I think what happened is his lawyers tried to get the stay put on the taking away of his business certificates and licenses and having a third party take them over, and tried to stop the trial. I think that the Attorney General fought them on trying to stop the trial, and so the Appellate Division ruled in her favor on that. The trial goes forward, but the Attorney General conceded that the business license, taking away the business licenses and so on, should be stayed until there's a judgment in the case, and so the Court of Appeals agreed with both parties on that and stayed that, so they're not taking away the properties right away. But can you imagine properties that were built up over literally decades on the brand Trump taken away because they don't like the valuations he put on it, notwithstanding expert opinion on the other side of the equation and so on, from a judge who's had two other major cases with developers, ruled against the developer in each case, and been reversed each time.
Yeah, I have talked to several, but one particular real estate appraiser in South Florida who's widely respected, who told me the evaluation of Mar-a-Lago at $18 million was a joke. He said, first of all, I'm not sure you could put a number on it. It's valuable because of its iconic nature. And then when you add the fact that it both fronts on the intercoastal waterway as well as the Atlantic Ocean, which is very rare on Palm Beach Island, he's not sure you could put a number on it, but he says it's certainly in excess of $300 million. Could be as much as $500 million. He said, I'm not sure you could really ever put a number on it. It's kind of what somebody would be willing to pay for it. And he said, in this case, somebody might be willing to pay as much as $1 billion. Let's touch, if we can, on the other local New York case. We can do this quickly, the so-called business records case. This one makes me scratch my head because this seems to me it should have been a civil case, but somehow this so-called hush money case, based solely on the claims of a former porn star and one of Trump's former lawyers, somehow became a criminal case. How did this happen?
Yeah, it's outrageous. And again, you've got a district attorney in this case who ran on a platform of being the one candidate who vowed to get Trump, get a conviction of Trump, a man who was a citizen, wasn't even under investigation at the time. You also know that the case sat around in the office and that the powers that be in the office, including the district attorney himself, did not feel this case should ever be brought. The special counsel brought in from a private law firm, Mark Pomeranz, has written a book about this, and in the book he acknowledges that the bosses and the different divisions were against this case, didn't think it was merited or should be brought, but it was brought anyway. I think the case is fundamentally flawed from the start in the charging document. This is a case in which they have a cockamamie way of rigging it into a felony. They charged doctoring business records in order to commit a felony, and they don't charge what the target crime is. So one can speculate, they've talked about tax improprieties, so maybe it's about taxes. Or they've talked about interfering with the election, that Stormy Daniels was paid hush money to affect the election. One can't possibly effectively defend this case without knowing what the crime is that they were supposedly doctoring business records to hide. They're completely different defenses depending on what the target crime is. And it wouldn't do any good now for the district attorney just to give them a bill of particulars or somehow specify what they think the crime was. You're entitled to an indictment from the grand jury. The grand jury clearly didn't decide what the felony was supposed to be, the target of the doctoring the business records. I think the thing has to be thrown out, but they have a judge who's a real Trump hater. Also, not coincidental, he was assigned to the Trump Organization case, another civil case. He was assigned to the Bannon case, that's going now, and the Trump case. They have a lot of judges there. They have a problem in that court that's been documented in the past of having the district attorney handpick judges to oversee grand jury proceedings and then having that judge who they handpicked stay on the case. That was litigated. It was brought in action by New York criminal defense lawyers years ago. The court said, well, you don't have a constitutional right under the state to a particular judge or to go into the wheel for random selection. But when the case was brought in federal court, the federal court said, had this been on direct appeal, there's a very good chance we would have said this has at least the appearance of impropriety. We should not allow this kind of selection. Now, in this case, they're claiming that the chief administrative judge put this Judge Merchan on the case because it was necessary for his expertise or something like that. It looks terrible. You need, in a case like this, you're prosecuting a former president of the United States, trying to stop him from being able to run by tying him up all the time. You need to be more than above board in the case if you want the American people to accept the result. The American people are speaking. One of the reasons he's soaring in the polls, as I say.
It's also my understanding that in this case, Judge Merchant gave a $50 contribution to the presidential campaign of Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Would that alone not be enough for the judge himself to realize that he has the appearance at a minimum of bias?
Should have been, but he got an opinion letter from an ethics board saying, well, that's a de minimis contribution, therefore it shouldn't be disqualifying. They're missing the point here. Our justice system is only as good as the public's confidence in its fairness and integrity. There's no objective person who could look at this, hear the judge's comments about President Trump in the past, see what his agenda is, and think it's appropriate for him to sit on this case, or that the case should be able to go forward as a matter of due process, Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights here, the way it has been charged.
Look, since I am obviously a strong and vocal supporter of Donald Trump, I do feel it's necessary for me to point out that David Schoen is not a Republican, has represented the Democratic Party in a number of important voting rights cases in the South. And therefore, I rely on him today for his his legal expertise. I think it's fair to say that in representing President Trump, he developed a personal affinity for him, but I think his views are objective. Let's turn, if we may, to the so-called documents case. This one is a head-scratcher as well. President Trump argues that under the 1977 Presidential Documents Act, that he, as president, is entitled to do whatever he wants with his presidential documents. And he points to a decision by Judge Amy Berman Jackson, the judge who sat in my case, that allowed Bill Clinton to keep his personal documents, in his case, in his sock drawer. David, do you think that that is going to be an effective defense in that case?
Yeah, the Presidential Records Act certainly is one of the primary defenses the lawyers intend to pursue. It must really stick in Judge Amy Berman Jackson's craw, and she's really one of the most notorious Trump haters on that bench that unfortunately was a great court at one time but has now become filled almost with Trump haters. But anyway, yeah, and so her decision essentially says that the president has the discretion to determine what are presidential documents and what are personal documents, and that he would have had that right is the defense. I think there's even a more basic impediment to this prosecution, and that is the decision by another real Trump-hating judge, Judge Beryl Howell, who was then the chief judge in the district court in D.C., turning over almost in wholesale fashion President Trump's lawyer, Evan Corcoran's notes, his notes to himself and to the file on observations in the case, without giving him a chance to check any redactions in the case and that sort of thing. That clearly, in my view, was inappropriate. She found it satisfied the crime fraud exception, apparently. It's impossible to believe that all of those notes did. And I think at the end of the day, if it goes forward, Evan Corcoran's going to end up being a great witness for President Trump to explain what his notes meant. But I think that turning over those notes tainted the entire grand jury process and therefore the indictment in the case, and ought to be thrown out on those grounds alone before even getting to the other question. And then, of course, from the public's perception, the idea that, you have to show that someone knowingly, willfully acted under this case, knowing they were doing something the law prohibited by having these documents. Donald Trump was a newcomer to politics and certainly to the Presidential Records Act and all of this. And while they want to say, well, some of his advisors told him he couldn't have this, others told him it was up to him. And so he was entitled to believe who he believed. It's his state of mind that controls. I can tell you he didn't believe he was doing anything wrong. But on the other hand, we see President Biden with documents apparently containing classified information in all sorts of places where they shouldn't have been. He's a guy who's been in politics his entire life, his entire adult life. So if anyone should have known and therefore acted willfully, that he wasn't entitled to those documents, and that should have been President Biden, who wasn't president at the time and therefore didn't have the same rights under the Presidential Records Act. So we'll see. There's a report, that he met with the special counsel who's been assigned to him this past week on a couple of occasions, but we haven't seen any prosecution there. I don't know that there should be, but if there isn't, then there certainly shouldn't be of Donald Trump.
Well, we also don't seem to have any leaks out of that investigation,
Right.
whereas all these other investigations seem to leak like a sieve. Folks, if you're just tuning in, I'm Roger Stone. This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC Radio, and we're interviewing one of the country's most prominent criminal defense attorneys, David Schoen, and we're very, very happy to have him with us on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. David, two cases I guess you have to see in similar context. The Washington, D.C. case brought by Special Counsel Jack Smith and the Georgia case brought by Fani Willis. In both cases, it appears to me that Donald Trump is being charged with questioning the outcome of an election.
Yeah.
And that somehow become a crime. I would think that it's within his First Amendment rights to question an election.
Yeah, and beyond that, it's possible, I think he certainly has a fair argument to be made that he had an obligation. His obligation under the Constitution is to ensure fairness of the elections and that the laws of the United States are faithfully executed. He took an oath of office for that. The Constitution requires it. And under the faithfully executed clause, if he believed that the election was marked by fraud or what they call, stolen or election fraud and so on, whatever term one used, that there were improprieties in the election, his argument would be that under the Constitution he had an obligation to investigate and to question and to test those things. So again, they want to say in both cases, well, but other people around him told him that the election was fair and they didn't have evidence of it. Well, Bernie Kerik, who did a lot of the investigation for him, would tell you that he provided President Trump with reams and reams of evidence reflecting improprieties in the election. Whether one believes that those things were accurate or not, the point here is when you're charging a person criminally, what did the defendant believe? The defendant certainly believed. I can tell you in his heart and soul, Donald Trump believes that the election was stolen from him, that there was fraud that determined the election. That's his belief. Everyone is entitled to disagree or agree with it. But what matters is his mens rea, his state of mind for these criminal prosecutions. You can argue at the polls, don't vote for Donald Trump because, he's claiming election fraud and you don't believe that happened. Or his supporters, at least half the country, it would appear, would say, no, vote for Donald Trump because the last election was stolen from him. Either way, those are political discussions to have, and anyone is entitled to their position, whether it's fact-based or not. What you can't do is charge someone criminally without showing that person had that mens rea. Now, that state of mind, a criminal state of mind. In both cases, the prosecutors are going to claim that's what they can prove, and part of it is they say, well, this one heard him say that he knew, this was a phony claim and all that. Listen, I'm telling you today, speak to him regularly. Donald Trump believes that the election was stolen from him, and he acted accordingly. He acted what he believed that the Constitution required and what lawyers around him told him the Constitution required and that must be done to ensure fair elections. They want to say, well, he didn't have any authority in a state election. It wasn't a state election. It's an election for the presidency of the United States that took place in the state as they always occur.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting also this entire argument, which is not constitutionally or historically correct. I have never advocated the formulation of panels of fake electors, but it is beyond dispute that Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution grants the state legislatures the power to award the presidential electors to a candidate for president based on the results of the election returns within that state. And to say, there was some wholesale fraud here. We have a historical precedent. In 1960, in Hawaii, it was thought, election night, that Vice President Richard Nixon had carried the state of Hawaii. His electors were actually approved. The supporters of John F. Kennedy objected. They formed a slate of alternative electors. And in the final analysis, when all of the absentee ballots were counted, JFK had in fact carried Hawaii. The Nixon electors were essentially deselected. The Kennedy electors were selected and went to the Electoral College. I don't know Professor Eastman. I've never read his famous memo, nor do I know this other fellow, Chesborough. But it seems to me that they had at least an underlying legal claim, particularly in Georgia, it seems, which seems to me to be a carbon copy of the D.C. case in many ways. Again, someplace I had no direct or indirect involvement other than reading about it. It's really the same case. In other words, the claim is Trump knew he lost the election, and he was conspiring with others to hold on to power. I don't think that's an accurate depiction of what happened.
No, I don't believe that either, but you're right that that's what both cases charge essentially, and it doesn't really matter, quite frankly, from a criminal perspective, if Eastman or Chesborough were right. This is the information provided to President Trump. He's not a lawyer. He's entitled to rely on lawyers. But, one of the things, from my perspective at least, that's so confounding about it is the laws on how the Electoral College works and how a state binds its electors vary among the states. It's a morass. And so in some states, the electors must vote the way the state election came out. In others, you have faithless electors who cannot vote for the candidate who won that state, and therefore they're not bound under state law. So that varies. What also varies is there's one of the leading experts on election laws, a Trump hater, has written and said that for anyone to say what Mike Pence's, Vice President Pence's authority was at the time on the House floor that's gotten so much press and so on, that's crystal clear, doesn't know what they're talking about. He said that nobody really understands what the authority is under the statute. And, he is someone who thinks President Trump was wrong, but he made clear that it's a very unclear area of the law. And so, again, we don't charge those kinds of things as criminal conduct.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. Let me thank our special guest, criminal defense lawyer David Schoen, for joining us on the Roger Stone Show today. I'm very, very grateful that you could join us, David. Have a wonderful Sunday afternoon.
Thank you very much. You too.